My parents evicted me at 18, killed my dog as punishment, and then broke into my house. At 30 years old, I've spent my life dealing with parents who never wanted children. Being their unplanned only child meant enduring my mother's drunken reminders that I destroyed her figure and ruined their child-free dreams. The early years were bearable, but once my cuteness faded, I became their burden. Their business consumed them while I existed only as an afterthought. They deliberately isolated me from my grandparents who lived far away, later claiming embarrassment about having a child. Between television and school teachers, I cobbled together what little guidance I received. I still remember my 4th birthday, the first one I actually understood what birthdays were supposed to be. I'd seen other kids at preschool have parties with cake and presents, their parents taking photos and singing to them. I spent weeks talking about my upcoming birthday, making little countdown paper chains like my teacher showed us. The day arrived, and I woke up early, too excited to sleep. I put on the special dress I'd picked out, the one with butterflies that my grandmother had sent, and waited in the living room. Hours passed. My father emerged from their bedroom at 10 a.m., stepping over me like I was furniture on his way to get coffee. When I excitedly reminded him it was my birthday, he looked at me blankly and said, "Your mother handles that stuff." My mother didn't emerge until afternoon, hungover from her wine night with friends. When I ran to her, asking about my cake and presents, she snapped, saying she forgot and that it's just a birthday, and I'll have plenty more. She threw a $20 bill at me and told me to order a pizza or something. I spent that birthday alone, watching cartoons, waiting for a celebration that never came. At bedtime, I carefully folded the $20 into my sock drawer, too afraid to actually spend it in case it was some kind of test. 3 weeks later, my mother ransacked my room looking for cash for the delivery guy, found my birthday money, and took it without a second thought. I wasn't always alone though. When I was 7, I begged for a puppy after months of perfect grades and impeccable behavior. After weeks of pleading, they finally relented and brought home a golden retriever puppy I named Sunny. He became my everything, my best friend, confidant, and the only living being in our house that showed me unconditional love. I spent every moment I could with him, teaching him tricks and cuddling him at night when I felt invisible to my parents. 3 months after my 8th birthday, I accidentally spilled juice on my father's business documents that he'd left on the kitchen table. He exploded in rage unlike anything I'd seen before. As punishment, I was sent to my room. The next morning, Sunny was gone. My mother coldly informed me that the dog had become too much trouble and they'd taken him to a farm. I cried for weeks. It wasn't until 15 years later that I learned the horrifying truth when my mother's friend let it slip at a chance encounter. "Your parents told everyone the dog was aggressive, but we all knew they took him to the shelter to be put down just to punish you for that spilled juice incident." I literally collapsed in the grocery store aisle when I heard this. They killed my dog to punish an 8-year-old child for an accident. Who does that? My elementary school years were a study in systematic neglect. While other kids showed up with carefully packed lunches featuring little notes from their parents, I got whatever I could scrounge from our nearly empty refrigerator when I remembered to make lunch at all. More often than not, I went hungry, too ashamed to tell teachers I hadn't eaten. By 3rd grade, I was doing my own laundry because no one else would, standing on a step stool to reach the controls, desperately trying to remove the stains from clothes that rarely got replaced when they were outgrown. I became a master at forging my parents' signatures on permission slips and report cards. They never attended a single parent-teacher conference, school play, or awards ceremony. When I won the spelling bee in 4th grade, the principal had to drive me home because my parents forgot to pick me up. He walked me to the door, trophy in hand, and attempted to share the good news with my mother, who answered the door in her bathrobe at 4 p.m., martini in hand. She cut him off mid-sentence with, "Next time call before you bring her back early," and closed the door in his face. I could see the pity in his eyes as the door shut between us. 5th grade was when I learned what it meant to be truly invisible in my own home. I developed severe stomach pains that left me doubled over and vomiting. For 3 days, I begged my parents to take me to a doctor. "Stop being dramatic," my mother said, tossing me a bottle of antacids before leaving for a dinner party. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper when I collapsed in the kitchen, crying that it feels like knives inside me. On the 4th morning, when they found me unconscious in my own vomit, they finally took me to the emergency room. Not out of concern, but because, as my mother later told a nurse with an exasperated sigh, "We couldn't just leave her on the floor. The cleaning lady doesn't come until Thursday." The doctor's face paled when the scans came back. My appendix had ruptured days ago. An infection was spreading throughout my abdomen. I remember him telling my parents how serious it was and that another few hours and I might not have survived. He was so shocked they didn't catch the classic symptoms. My mother turned on the waterworks, claiming I'd only mentioned a tummy ache and that I was always seeking attention. The way that doctor looked at her, I knew he didn't believe a word. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital fighting for my life, undergoing multiple surgeries to clean out the infection. My parents visited exactly twice, once to bring me a change of clothes and once to discuss insurance with the hospital administrator. A kind nurse brought me books and sat with me during her breaks because no one else did. When I was finally discharged, my mother's first words weren't, "I'm glad you're okay, but this has been such an inconvenience for us." The hospital social worker tried to investigate, asking me pointed questions about my home life. I remember the terror in my eyes, silently pleading with my mother, who stood in the doorway with that look that said everything would be worse if I spoke up. So I lied. I told the social worker I'd been too scared to tell them how bad it hurt, and that my parents took me right away when they realized. The case was closed. That night, my mother hissed that I almost cost them everything with my dramatics, and that I should be grateful they paid the portion of the hospital bill not covered by insurance. To this day, I have a foot-long scar across my abdomen that required additional surgeries to revise because the infection was so extensive. Every time I see it in the mirror, I'm reminded that my life wasn't even worth a trip to urgent care. The summer before middle school brought a new level of abandonment. My parents decided to take a 3-week European vacation. Out Adults only, of course. Rather than arranging proper childcare for their 11-year-old, they hired the 17-year-old daughter of their business associate to check in on me every other day. They left $200 for food, no emergency contacts, and vague instructions to behave. The teenager pocketed $150 of my food money immediately and showed up exactly twice during those 3 weeks. I survived on ramen noodles, cereal, and whatever I could safely cook in the microwave. By the second week, I'd run out of clean clothes and had to hand wash my underwear in the bathroom sink. The power went out during a thunderstorm, and I spent 2 terrified nights alone in the dark because I had no idea who to call. When the neighbors finally realized something was wrong, they spotted me collecting rainwater in buckets to flush the toilet since the electric pump for our well wasn't working. They called Child Protective Services. My parents cut their trip short, rushing home not out of concern for me but to do damage control. They arrived with gifts, a snow globe from Paris and a touristy t-shirt 2 sizes too small, and transformed instantly into doting parents in front of the social worker. My mother was quick to explain to the caseworker that there must be some misunderstanding. We arranged for our niece to stay with her, but she had an emergency. We've been calling daily to check in, haven't we, sweetie? The terror in her eyes as she squeezed my shoulder left no question about the expected answer. The case was dismissed, the neighbors labeled busybodies, and my punishment for embarrassing them was being locked in my room for the remainder of the summer with books as my only companions. Middle school brought the cruelty of other children, magnified by my obvious neglect. My unwashed hair, ill-fitting clothes, and lack of basic social skills made me an easy target. Girls would ostentatiously hold their noses when I walked by. Boys would trip me in the hallway, and no one would sit with me at lunch. When I came home with a bloody nose after being shoved into a locker, my father glanced up from his laptop just long enough to say, "You should learn to fit in better." My mother's contribution was, "We're not paying for another new school if you can't make this one work." In 7th grade, I made my first and only friend, Melissa, a fellow outcast with thick glasses and a stutter. We bonded over our shared love of books and status as social pariahs. For the first time, I experienced something resembling normalcy. Melissa's parents were kind to me, always offering dinner when I visited and treating me with casual affection that felt alien but wonderful. Then came the day Melissa asked if I could attend her birthday sleepover. When I tentatively approached my mother with the invitation, she looked at me as if I'd suggested flying to the moon. She told me I looked pathetic, begging for social invitations. She followed that up with, "We don't know these people. They could be crazies or criminals for all you know." No amount of explanation about Melissa's normal, kind family would suffice. The next day at school, I had to make up an elaborate lie about why I couldn't attend. Melissa's hurt was palpable, and our friendship never quite recovered. By 8th grade, she'd found other friends, and I was alone again, a situation my parents seemed to prefer, as it meant no inconvenient social obligations for them to decline. Teenage birthdays meant solitude with a crumpled $20 bill tossed my way before they disappeared to important business dinners. Holidays? A gift card left on the counter while they jetted off somewhere warm. School supplies came with a credit card and strict spending cap. I begged for an artificial Christmas tree just to have some semblance of normalcy. Picture them as those insufferable people dressed in black, swirling overpriced wine glasses while judging everyone beneath them, including their daughter. Even now, they maintain that superiority complex despite their financial failures, my father sporting what resembles roadkill atop his balding head. The Christmas I was 13 stands out as particularly cruel. I'd spent weeks dropping hints about a specific art set I coveted, a professional-grade collection of colored pencils I'd seen in an art supply store window. Art had become my escape, my private world where I could create beauty my life lacked. Christmas morning arrived, and for once, there was actually a wrapped package with my name on it under their tiny designer tabletop tree. The artificial full-sized one I'd begged for was tacky. My hands trembled with rare hope as I carefully unwrapped it, trying to contain my excitement. Inside was indeed an art set, a cheap dollar store collection of broken crayons and dried-out markers, clearly a last-minute afterthought. As tears welled in my eyes, my mother snapped, "What? No thank you? This is why we don't bother with gifts. You're always so ungrateful." Later that day, I overheard her on the phone laughing about how she'd grabbed some junk from the donation pile for my gift because she'd forgotten. Meanwhile, they exchanged extravagant presents with each other, a designer watch for him, diamond earrings for her, opened with theatrical delight in front of me. High school brought academic success as my only outlet. I threw myself into studying, staying at school as late as possible to avoid going home. The library became my sanctuary until closing time, when librarians would gently remind me they were locking up. I earned straight A's not because of any parental pressure, like they never once asked about my grades, but because achievement was the only thing that felt like mine. I joined every free club and activity that didn't require parental permission or financial contribution. When my artwork won a district competition, the school called my home to share the news. My mother answered, listened for 20 seconds, then said, "I think you have the wrong number," and hung up. By my junior year of high school, I'd turned to academics as my escape plan. My English teacher, Mrs. Lawson, was the first adult who seemed to notice my potential beneath the silence. She stayed after school to help me prepare my college applications, encouraged me to enter writing competitions, and even drove me to tours of nearby universities when my parents couldn't be bothered with that college nonsense. When my essay won a regional competition, she submitted it to a prestigious university scholarship program without telling me. She knew I wouldn't have believed in myself enough to do it. The day the letter arrived still haunts me. A full academic scholarship to one of the top universities in the country, covering tuition, room and board, even a stipend for books. Mrs. Lawson cried when I showed her, hugging me tightly and whispering, "You did it. You're getting out." For one glorious week, I allowed myself to dream of dormitory life, stimulating classes, and most importantly, being hundreds of miles away from my parents' cold indifference. Then I made the mistake of leaving the acceptance package on the kitchen table uncomfortable for my parents to see. I thought, foolishly, that maybe this would finally make them proud. Maybe they'd see I wasn't the burden they always claimed I was. I came home from school to find my mother holding the letter, her face twisted in a way I'd never seen before. My mother's words still haunt me. Who do you think you are? You think you're better than us now? Going to some fancy school to look down on the people who raised you? My father emerged from his study, his voice dangerously quiet. Do you have any idea what this would do to our reputation? Everyone would know we couldn't afford to send our daughter to college ourselves. I explained to them it was a full scholarship and that it wouldn't cost them anything. You wouldn't have to do anything. My mother took that as further insult when she said, "Is that what you tell people? That we don't support you?" What happened next unfolded with the calculated precision of people who'd spent years perfecting the art of crushing spirits. They called the university's admissions office, with me sobbing in the background, and declined the scholarship. They claimed we had family circumstances that would prevent me from attending. When the confused administrator asked to speak with me directly, my father covered the receiver and hissed, "Say one wrong word and you'll be out on the street tonight instead of after graduation." Then they contacted Mrs. Lawson. They accused her of overstepping boundaries and interfering in family matters. They threatened to report her to the school board for inappropriate involvement in my life. She was devastated. I could see it in her eyes the next day when she couldn't even look at me in class. She was transferred to another school the following semester. I never got to say goodbye. At 16, hoping for connection, I asked to work at their business. What would clients think seeing you there? My mother scoffed. But the most sadistic part came a week later. My mother had gathered all my journals, years of writing, poems, stories, the only place I'd ever felt safe expressing myself, and my collection of secondhand books that I'd painstakingly acquired from library sales and hidden under my bed. She'd placed them in a metal trash can in the backyard. She lit a match, dropping it into the can. I watched 16 years of dreams and words curl into ash while she stood there sipping her wine. When I tried to rescue a half-burned journal, she slapped my hand away hard enough to leave marks. "This is what happens when you get ideas above your station," she said. "Everything burns." Senior year brought college application season, and this time I kept my efforts completely hidden. I applied to state schools within driving distance, knowing I'd need to work full-time while attending classes since my parents had made it clear they wouldn't contribute a penny. I was accepted to 3 schools, all with partial academic scholarships that wouldn't cover living expenses. I dared to ask my parents if I could continue living at home while attending the local community college. My father actually laughed in my face. "The day you turn 18 is the day your free ride ends," he said. "We've done our legal obligation. Anything beyond that is your problem." That night, I heard them through the wall, laughing about how the little leech thought she could extend her stay. The incident that branded itself most painfully into my memory happened just before graduation. I'd been selected as valedictorian, an honor that required parent signatures on several permission forms. When I hesitantly presented the paperwork, my father scanned it briefly before tearing it in half. "This is just more attention-seeking," he said flatly. "Besides, no one wants to hear whatever sad little speech you've prepared." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "It's embarrassing enough having to sit through the ceremony at all. We don't need to extend it with your dramatics." I tried to explain that being valedictorian would help with college scholarships, maybe even open doors to additional financial aid. My father's response was to grab me by the arm, his fingers digging in painfully, and drag me to his home office. He yanked open a drawer and pulled out a folder, thrusting it at me. Inside was an official-looking document with "Notice of Termination of Tenancy" printed at the top, already filled out with my name and dated for the day after my 18th birthday. "This is what you should be focusing on," he said, his voice deadly calm, "finding somewhere else to live, not playing pretend academic." I graduated without recognition, sitting among my peers while the second-ranked student gave the speech that should have been mine. The day after my 18th birthday, with 3 months of high school remaining, they slapped an eviction notice on my bedroom door. "Legal obligation fulfilled," my father announced about my upbringing. I had a minimum wage job and pitiful savings. Moving day arrived and they conveniently scheduled brunch elsewhere while a friend's mother helped transport my meager belongings to an apartment where roaches outnumbered amenities. The apartment was barely habitable, a basement studio with water damage, exposed wiring, and a bathroom door that didn't close completely. The landlord had rented to me only because I'd paid 3 months in advance, depleting nearly all my savings from the part-time job I'd been working since sophomore year. The refrigerator hummed so loudly it was impossible to sleep through, and the shower alternated between scalding and freezing with no warning. But it was mine, and for the first time, I didn't have to navigate the minefield of my parents' moods just to exist in a space. My retail position came with a middle-aged manager whose accidental touching and inappropriate comments about my appearance became routine. After enduring months of harassment, my report resulted in termination for fabricated attitude issues and dress code violations despite wearing the standard uniform. Corporate eventually fired him for theft but refused my reinstatement, claiming I was entangled in a situation, while reluctantly changing my record from fired to laid off, suggesting I should feel thankful for this minimal concession. My first attempt at building a life post-high school collapsed under the weight of that job loss. With no income, no family support, and no understanding of how to navigate systems like unemployment benefits or social services, things my parents had never bothered to teach me, I quickly fell behind on rent. Each morning, I would walk miles to the library to use their computers, applying for dozens of jobs daily. Each evening, I returned to increasingly threatening notices from my landlord. I tried calling my parents once, just once, when the eviction notice appeared on my door. My mother answered, and I could hear the tinkle of ice in her perpetual cocktail glass. When I explained my situation, her response was a dismissive laugh. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "this is exactly what growing up looks like. Maybe next time you'll think twice before getting yourself fired." Then she hung up. Financial collapse came swiftly since they'd never taught me basic money management. Evicted and desperate, I stood crying at their doorstep seeking temporary shelter. Not our problem, my mother stated before closing the door against the December snow. I ended up in a backyard tent, washing in public restrooms, eating at soup kitchens, and working under the table jobs. During this period, I suffered 2 assaults I couldn't report without stable housing or support. The first assault happened 3 weeks into homelessness. I'd found work washing dishes at a diner, paid daily in cash under the table. The owner's son offered me a ride home after my shift, and I was too ashamed to admit I had no home to go to. When he discovered I was living in a tent behind the public library, he offered his couch just for tonight. I was exhausted, freezing, and desperate. His generosity came with an expected price I wasn't willing to pay. When I resisted, he took what he wanted anyway, leaving me bruised and bleeding. The next day, I was informed my services were no longer required at the diner. With no address, no phone, and wearing the same clothes I'd been assaulted in, I knew reporting it would be futile. Police would take one look at me, homeless, jobless, parentless, and dismiss me as trash. The second assault came from someone I thought was helping me. A middle-aged woman who volunteered at the soup kitchen offered me odd jobs cleaning her house. For 3 weeks, it seemed legitimate. Hard work for meager pay, but at least it was something. Then her husband came home early one day. He cornered me in the laundry room, hand over my mouth, warning that if I screamed or told anyone, he'd make sure I was arrested for stealing from them. Who would believe the homeless girl over the respectable homeowner? When I showed up the next day, bruised and hollow-eyed, his wife accused me of making eyes at her husband and threw me out without the money I was owed. My salvation came when their neighbor discovered me searching through trash for food scraps. This stranger showed more compassion than my biological parents ever had. She threatened to expose their abandonment to their social circle and authorities, eventually extracting contact information for my extended family. Angela, that neighbor, found me huddled behind their hedge, trying to retrieve a half-eaten sandwich from their garbage can. Instead of calling the police, she invited me inside, fed me a proper meal, and listened to my story without judgment. Then she did something no one had ever done before. She got angry on my behalf, not at me, but for me. I watched in stunned silence as this stranger, this random woman who owed me nothing, called my parents' house and left a blistering message threatening to contact every business associate, country club member, and social connection they had to expose how they'd abandoned their barely adult daughter to homelessness in winter. And don't think I won't contact Child Protective Services retrospectively, she warned. I have a friend who works there, and while they may not be able to force you to care for an 18-year-old, they can certainly open an investigation into your treatment of a minor. The next day, my mother's shaking voice left a message on Angela's answering machine. Not an apology, of course, but contact information for my paternal grandparents, people I'd been told wanted nothing to do with me. Now leave us alone, my mother hissed. She's their problem now. Contacting my paternal grandparents revealed horrifying truths. They'd been sending monthly payments specifically for my care and education, money my parents pocketed. They showed me birthday cards I'd never received and gifts never delivered. My parents had portrayed me as troubled and disinterested in family connections. My grandparents legally severed ties with my father, condemning them both as disgraceful humans. My grandparents didn't just take me in, they engulfed me with the love I'd been starved of my entire life. My grandmother cried when she saw how thin I was, how I flinched at sudden movements, how I asked permission to use the bathroom in my own home. We thought you didn't want to know us, she kept saying, showing me boxes of returned letters, cards containing uncashed checks, packages marked refused. For 18 years, they'd been trying to reach me while my parents systematically blocked every attempt. They had photo albums, dozens of them, documenting their attempts to be part of my life. Pictures of them standing outside my elementary school, hoping to catch a glimpse of me at events my parents had told them I wasn't participating in. Documentation of the college fund they'd established the day I was born, now containing enough for a full education anywhere I wanted, plus living expenses. Records of the monthly support payments they'd sent to my parents specifically earmarked for my care, with copies of the canceled checks bearing my father's signature. But the most soul-crushing revelation came during my second month living with my grandparents. While helping them organize old photo albums, I discovered pictures of a teenage boy at birthday parties, graduations, and family vacations, with my father proudly standing beside him with his arm around the boy's shoulders. When I asked who this was, my grandmother's face fell. After a long silence, she admitted this was my half-brother, Jason. It turns out my father had a brief affair 3 years before I was born, resulting in this son he'd kept secret from me my entire life. But instead of abandoning this child, my father had been an active and loving presence in Jason's life, attending his football games, celebrating his achievements, and even paying for his entire college education while throwing me onto the street. The photos showed my father smiling more genuinely with this other child than he'd ever smiled at me. There were pictures of them fishing together, building a tree house, and even one of my father weeping proudly at Jason's high school graduation, shortly after he refused to attend mine, claiming he was too busy with work. The timeline was the most devastating part. A photo of my father and Jason at a baseball game dated the weekend I'd spent alone with a high fever, abandoned because my parents had important business. A family vacation to Hawaii when I was told they were attending a conference. Christmas dinners where they smiled with Jason and his mother around a beautifully decorated tree during years when I was left with a microwave dinner and instructions not to wait up. Every business trip, every late meeting, every weekend conference had been a lie. My father had simply been living his real life with his real family, the one he actually wanted. I later learned that my father had visited Jason at least twice monthly throughout my childhood, using business trips as his cover. All those weekends I spent alone, my father was building memories with his real child, the one he actually wanted. Jason had received birthday and Christmas gifts worth hundreds of dollars while I got throwaway gift cards. He'd been taken on summer vacations to Disney World in Europe while I stayed home with the TV. The most devastating frustrating part, Jason knew about me. He'd been told I was mentally unstable and wanted nothing to do with the family. My father had constructed an entire narrative making me the villain to justify his blatant favoritism. The psychological damage of discovering I wasn't just unwanted, but actually replaced nearly broke me. I spent weeks barely able to function, piecing together a lifetime of absences and excuses that suddenly made perfect sense. My grandfather, sensing my spiral, arranged for therapy with a trauma specialist who helped me understand that none of this reflected my worth as a person. Some people, she told me gently, aren't capable of love. The deficiency is in them, not in those they fail to love. After a year living with these actually loving grandparents, I balanced community college with employment. Eventually, they sold me their house at drastically reduced value before relocating to Arizona for my grandmother's health needs. We want you to have security no one can take away, my grandfather explained. My decent job requires occasional travel, but relationships remain difficult due to severe trust issues stemming from abandonment and homelessness, induced PTSD that requires twice-weekly therapy. The first panic attack happened when a coworker surprised me with a birthday cake. The simple kindness, remembering my birthday when my own parents never had, triggered such overwhelming emotion that I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't stop the tears. My therapist explained it as an emotional flashback, a common PTSD symptom where present-day kindness collides with past cruelty, creating a disconnect the brain struggles to reconcile. Dating proved nearly impossible. The first hint of emotional intimacy would send me running, convinced it was either a trap or temporary. Physical intimacy was worse. The trauma of those assaults during homelessness left scars no one could see, but that screamed at the slightest touch. Every relationship ended the same way. You don't let anyone in, they'd say. It's like loving a ghost. Returning from a work trip in late 2020, I discovered my parents had broken into my property and settled in like owners. "Sweetheart, we've missed you so much," they greeted with manufactured warmth. When ordered to leave, my father snarled, "This is my parents' house and I have more right to it than you do, you ungrateful little thing." Police intervention prompted my mother's theatrical sobbing, claiming I'd invited them to live with me but was now cruelly evicting them because I'd always been mentally unstable. The officers predictably sided with the middle-aged couple over the hysterical young woman. That first night back was surreal, finding them lounging in my living room, drinking my wine, my mother wearing my bathrobe, as if they belonged there. The casual way they'd commandeered my space, rearranged my furniture, replaced my photos with theirs. The audacity of it struck me dumb. When I finally found my voice to demand an explanation, they spun a tale of business hardship, temporary setbacks, and family obligation. "After everything we've done for you," my mother said with a straight face, as if our shared history was a Hallmark movie instead of a horror story. Their business collapse stemmed from my father's gambling addiction and my mother's compulsive shopping, embezzling over $500,000 before declaring bankruptcy to avoid paying final employee wages. Their remaining possessions consisted of a company van and designer clothing they refused to liquidate. The police officers who responded to my call viewed me with immediate suspicion when my mother threw herself into one of their arms, sobbing about her mentally ill daughter who was having another episode. My father presented counterfeit mail and documents suggesting they'd been living there for months with my permission. When I tried to explain, to show proof of ownership, the officer cut me off with a patronizing, "Ma'am, please calm down." They suggested I work this out as a family, rather than escalating the situation. Translation: "We believe these respectable-looking, middle-aged people over you, young woman." For 5 excruciating months, they occupied my home, consuming my food, using my belongings, and contributing insulting amounts while tripling utility costs through excessive water usage and leaving electronics running continuously. Attempts to discuss proper rent triggered my mother's tears about financially abusing elderly parents when they're barely in their 50s, and reminders of their sacrificed best years raising me. Those 5 months were psychological warfare. They colonized my space room by room, bringing in their aesthetic, garish and pretentious, their routines, loud and intrusive, their drama, constant and exhausting. They'd use all the hot water, eat food I'd purchased without replacing it, leave dishes in the sink for me to clean. My father would take business calls at full volume at 6 a.m. in the kitchen. My mother would reorganize my cupboards without permission, throwing away items she deemed unnecessary or cheap. They criticized everything. My furniture, so basic. My clothes, don't you care about your appearance? My career, not exactly prestigious, is it? My friends, whom they interrogated mercilessly on the rare occasions they visited. My mother invaded my bedroom during absences, borrowed my personal items without permission, and attempted unauthorized redecorating. She demanded the master bedroom because we're your parents and deserve the best room. My refusal prompted neighborhood rumors about supposed elder abuse and captivity in their tiny guest room. I returned home early from work one day to find my mother wearing my clothes. Not just any clothes, but the cashmere sweater my grandmother had given me for Christmas, paired with my only designer jeans. When confronted, she shrugged and said, "They look better on me anyway." Later that week, I discovered she'd been using my expensive skincare products, emptying bottles worth hundreds of dollars that I'd saved for months to purchase. Her response: "You should be happy to share with your mother. After all, I gave you life," as if birthing me entitled her to everything I'd ever earn or own. The absolute lowest point came when I overheard my father on the phone with Jason during their stay. "No, son, I can't make it to your engagement party. I'm stuck living in a dump because your half-sister is punishing us for needing a little help. Yes, she's still the same selfish, ungrateful girl. I know you offered to let us stay with you, but I don't want to be a burden on you and your fiancé. We'll try to send a gift when we can afford it." The next day, a $300 package arrived for them containing expensive champagne from Jason, which they drank in the living room while mockingly toasting to family loyalty. That champagne incident broke something in me. The realization that even while mooching off me, sleeping under my roof, roof, eating my food, they were still maintaining the fiction of me as the villain with my half-brother. The casual cruelty of drinking that expensive champagne in front of me, toasting to family while excluding me in my own home. I consulted a lawyer the next day, willing to spend whatever it took to remove them legally. After court proceedings where they alleged mental instability and fabricated promises about permanent residency, the judge ordered their departure within 30 days. Afterward, my father threatened me, saying I was dead to them and would regret treating family this way. My laughter while reminding them they'd abandoned their teenage daughter to winter homelessness nearly provoked physical violence before my mother intervened. The courtroom scene was a masterclass in manipulation. My mother sobbed on cue, clutching a handkerchief while describing how I'd changed after moving in with my grandparents, becoming hostile and unrecognizable from the sweet little girl they'd raised. My father presented doctored photographs of family outings that never happened, spoke earnestly about their concerns for my mental health, and claimed they'd moved in to monitor my increasingly erratic behavior. When my attorney presented the eviction notice they'd served me at 18 and documentation of my subsequent homelessness, my mother actually gasped theatrically and whispered loudly enough for the front row to hear, "Those are obviously forgeries. We would never do that to our precious daughter." The judge saw through their performance, thank God, but the damage to my reputation was done. Courtroom spectators whispered about the ungrateful daughter and poor parents trying to help their troubled child. A local gossip columnist even picked up the story, running a sympathetic piece about the prominent business couple facing heartbreaking rejection from the daughter they sacrificed everything for. The public humiliation was almost worse than having them in my home. That final month was a scorched earth campaign. They accidentally spilled red wine on my white sofa, the first piece of new furniture I'd ever bought myself. My mother's cigarette mysteriously burned holes in my curtains. The garbage disposal broke after my father shoved silverware down it by mistake. They left every light and faucet running when they went out, driving my utility bills to astronomical heights. They told neighbors I was withholding their medication, restricting their food, and locking them in their room at night. Mrs. Patterson from next door actually came over with a casserole for your poor parents and a lecture about honoring thy father and mother. When I tried to explain the reality, she cut me off with, "There are two sides to every story, dear, but only one commandment about respecting your parents." The worst was what they did to my bedroom when I was at work, a violation so profound I still have nightmares about it. I'd kept a memory box under my bed, containing the few precious mementos of my childhood that had brought me any joy: a ribbon from a spelling bee, a dried corsage from the prom I attended alone, a smooth stone a kind teacher had given me, saying its strength reminded him of mine. I came home to find these items scattered across my bed, many broken or defaced. My ribbon had been cut into pieces, my corsage crushed to dust, my treasured stone thrown through my bedroom window, shattering the glass. A note in my mother's handwriting lay among the destruction, "Just helping you clear out worthless junk. You're welcome." They denied responsibility, of course. My mother suggested I'd done it myself during a psychotic episode and blamed my false accusations on my persecution complex. After that final month of tension and deliberate destruction, they finally left on the court-mandated date. I watched them load their designer clothes and my father's ridiculous toupee into their remaining vehicle, a company van emblazoned with their failed business logo. My mother shot me one last venomous look as I deliberately changed the locks while they watched, not bothering to hide my relief at their departure. They found a cramped studio apartment in the neighboring city, walls painted an offensive shade of green, ancient carpet, and a toilet that looked like it predated their marriage. When my mother dragged me there once, attempting to evoke guilt with her theatrical sighs and pointed glances, I remained deliberately oblivious. They took the bed and television from the guest room. I gladly surrendered both, wanting nothing that carried the memory of their presence. I thought karma had finally caught up with them. The pretentious couple who wore black and sipped overpriced wine while looking down on everyone, now reduced to living in squalor. I was wrong. 5 months later, my grandmother called with news that made my stomach turn. My parents had contacted them to boast about their new business venture, similar to their previous one but smaller in scale. Their smug certainty that they would climb back to their former status dripped through my grandmother's recounting of the conversation. Curious and admittedly resentful, I did some investigating. After several calls to distant relatives I rarely spoke with, I discovered the source of their sudden financial resurrection. My maternal grandfather, a man I'd never been allowed to know, had died 7 months earlier, leaving my mother a sizable inheritance. The inheritance had funded their new business, which according to online reviews was already gathering clientele and positive feedback. The revelation crystallized something for me. My parents hadn't just failed at parenthood, they'd actively rejected it while simultaneously preventing others who might have loved me properly from being in my life. My father's parents had wanted a relationship with me, but my parents deliberately isolated me from them. They kept me from my extended family not out of neglect, but calculation. They didn't want witnesses to their parenting. I spoke with my grandparents about the possibility of selling the house and moving closer to them. Unlike my parents, they encouraged me to do what was best for my well-being, with no thought of how it might benefit them. It would mean starting over, finding new employment, building a new life, but the prospect of putting geographical distance between myself and the two people who had caused so much damage felt like breathing fresh air after decades in a smoke-filled room. Whether I stay or go, I've made one decision with absolute clarity. My parents are dead to me. If they ever come knocking again, when age makes them vulnerable and they suddenly discover a need for family, they'll receive exactly what they gave, nothing. And if I ever become a parent myself, their example will serve as the perfect blueprint of what never to become. No child deserves what they did to me.